Hello, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking about reciprocity.com. The E is spelled with a 3. It's a sharing economy proofreading platform that I'm trying to build where you should be able to get all of the feedback, skills, and just pure wonder required for you to become a prolific writer and scholar. In this particular video, I really wanted to talk about PhD supply and demand. I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I'm really curious about this. I often hear that there is a glut of graduate students, that there's much more supply of graduate students than demand. And I thought I would talk about just my own personal experiences with this, as well as what can you do in terms of moving forward with your own PhD and getting your own job, or choosing to actually go in, become a PhD or getting a PhD or going into graduate school. So this is part of my thesis help series where I just try to put out really useful information for anybody that's interested in going into graduate school. That's people that are doing, a master's degree or a PhD or something along those lines, are interested in that. I'm trying to be as helpful as I possibly can with this kind of information. So what is a supply and demand? What do I mean by supply and demand? Well, this is kind of a really simple concept that is talked about a fair bit in economics. It's not necessarily all that clear once you start digging into the details of it and whatnot. What is exactly supply and demand? But essentially, supply, and I'll get into what I mean there, but essentially supply is the production of PhDs in this case, right? So there is a number of universities that are continuously producing as much PhDs as they possibly can. So that means bringing in PhD candidates, advertising to them, getting them to come in, and getting them to actually go into graduate school, go all the way through to the 4 years or 2 years of coursework, then doing the comprehensive exams, then doing 2 to 3 to 4, maybe even 5 years of research independently before they actually get their PhD. Now, on the demand side, this involves all of the people that are hiring PhDs or hiring graduate students out of their graduate degree, right? So this would be all the firms. This would be firms being companies. This would be all of the universities that are available, that are looking for as research institutes, governments, all those kind of people that are looking for people that have an advanced degree, however it is, or whatever you're looking at with an advanced degree. Now, this is kind of true within any sort of research granting degree or research sort of focused degree. So you can look into what exactly I'm saying. If you're kind of more interested in doing maybe a sort of practitioner-oriented degree, like a MBA or a nursing degree, and a master's of accounting, it doesn't necessarily apply as much because there is a lot more uncertainty. There's a lot more certainty with those particular markets. So it's really easy to sort of understand the supply and demand in those particular markets. But in a research degree, the reason why a lot of people suggest this is because that there's a lot of PhDs that have a really difficult time finding a job, right? So there appears to be there's a large glut of PhDs. And if you go talk around and you talk to a lot of people that are coming out of graduate school, it is really difficult to find a job. I couldn't find a job for a couple of years after I graduated from my own PhD, and, continuously searched and did research and stuff like that at the same time, and did my own sort of postdoc. And, it's essentially, it's really tough to find a job after a PhD. And that's why a lot of people say that there's more supply than demand. However, it's not necessarily the case that it's because of supply and demand, the issues of supply and demand. In those particular cases, the reason why I'm going to suggest that is because there's not really a clear market. It's not really a commodity. So supply and demand curves and all that kind of stuff will work really, really well with a particular commodity when you have, so for example, if you have wheat, and you produce X amount of wheat, the entire country produces X amount of wheat, and then we know what the demand is for the wheat every single year. It doesn't really, it fluctuates a little bit, but not a lot, right? So we can sort of establish what the price is on that particular thing, whatever you're producing. But there's a lot of problems with sort of taking that analogy and looking at a research degree, like a PhD or graduate school or something like that, because there's different factors that sort of change the market substantially. One of them is search costs. So what do I mean by search costs? Well, this is where there's transaction costs that are affiliated with people trying to look for particular skills, and as well as sort of search costs that are affiliated with people that have the skills, trying to identify people that or firms or companies that will actually hire them. There's a tremendous amount of search costs there because especially from from firms and companies and governments and stuff, they have a really difficult time putting their fingers on what exactly a PhD does and what they're really doing, because there's really just not a lot that are being produced, right? So the people that are actually there hiring, they don't really understand what a PhD is about. They see a heck of a lot more MBAs, for example. They see a lot more or masters of nursing and stuff like that, but they don't really see a lot of somebody that has a PhD, so they can't really put their finger on what is the value of that particular degree, right? It's really kind of murky and difficult to sort of figure that out. So there is a lot of search costs in the sense that they have to dig deep and sort of research a lot and try to figure out what exactly this PhD does and what value does it provide to the particular company or particular organization. In academia, that even does play out substantially because there's people that are doing really interesting research that is different, and they can't. You have to invest. You have to invest a lot into trying to figure out what they're doing, right? And often it requires a lot of energy on the person that's sort of searching and looking for a particular candidate, and they're just not going to put that time and effort into it because it's just, it's really difficult. They have a limited amount of time to search and sort of figure things out. The second thing that's really important is sort of perceptions of, and part of the perceptions is kind of related to search costs as well, but it's perceptions of what a PhD is about. Again, there's not a lot of information about this kind of stuff, or people don't really bump into a lot of people that do a PhD other than at a university. So they haven't really a poor understanding of exactly what's going on behind the scenes. And then the other thing, what's interesting is that the scientists themselves, I'm going to sort of point this out, is they're at the cutting edge of science. They're at the cutting edge of research. They're at the cutting edge of whatever it is they're looking at. So they're probably about 10 years out, maybe 15 years out from where the market actually is that's going to demand that particular skill. Right now, there's some sectors or some sort of parts of the sort of economy that it's much more clear that there is that, there's much more closer sort of relationship between somebody that gets a PhD or research degree and somebody that does, or somebody that's in industry. So maybe engineering, some forms of engineering, not all engineering, right? There might be in, maybe in biology, for example, or pharmacology, right? So if you're studying different molecules in a pharmaceutical company, they would be really, really interested to see what PhDs are doing in that particular area, right? Because there is a lot of overlap, and they're always pushing this data science in that area. So what the issue is then it's easier for the firms to sort of understand what they're doing, but at the same time, it's really kind of interesting. I as a professor now, I've been doing this for a few years. I really do see that a lot of PhD candidates don't really grasp. And I myself, I went through the exact same thing. You don't really grasp what your own skills are, and you don't really get what you're doing because you're at the cutting edge of science, or you're always pushing something, you're always learning something. So you have a tendency to underestimate the amount of skills that you've acquired, the knowledge that you acquired, because you're always like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is kind of messy, and this is I haven't learned that much. But really, you actually have learned a lot of stuff. So you tend to really, really undersell the amount of knowledge that you've accumulated over time, because you have all of this self-doubt, and you're always pushing the envelope, right? As a scientist or researcher or whatever you're doing in your graduate schools. So there is this perception that you don't know a lot, and so you sort of undermarket yourself, and you don't really do a good job of that. As well as you're at the sort of, you maybe are 10, 15 years out, and then how do you have to, it's up to you to sort of explain what's going on with what you're doing to the firms that are out there. Unless you sort of stumble across somebody that actually knows what they're doing, it's going to be really difficult, or knows what you're talking about. It's going to be difficult to sort of have the added disadvantage of communicating exactly what you're doing, right? So I saw this happen, for example, with big data. There's a lot of people that have been working with quote unquote big data for decades now. And big data just means like using statistics, right? But in the last few years, it's really become quite popular, and lots of people sort of are marketing on that. Another one is sort of behavioral economics, or, doing something along those lines, behavioral strategy. There wasn't really industry demand for this until sort of Richard Thaler came along and sort of started talking about some of this stuff and implementing and getting governments to implement some of this stuff, and it actually works really well, and it showed that it was worked really well. So all of a sudden, companies and other people are really interested in getting behavioral scientists to come and work at their particular companies, which was kind of really strange for a long time. That didn't happen, right? There wasn't a lot of market overlap, because the firms, the people that are out there, just didn't understand what they were doing, right? That they were just kind of detached from what was going on. It was really difficult for the researchers themselves to communicate that. So sometimes there's kind of like this kind of not a very good overlap, and that there is the differences in perception of exactly what's going on, and problems with sort of marketing the different skills, right? Now, the other thing that ends up happening is that there's a lot of uncertainty over the motives of people actually pursuing a PhD, right? So lots of people go into a PhD, a lot of people go into a graduate degree for all sorts of reasons. There's what's called heterogeneous motives, right? People are doing things for whatever reason. Some people might just like school, and they continue on to do schoolwork. They might be complete slackers, and they want to say, well, I just want something that's easy, so I'm going to do graduate school. There is people that really are motivated, and they can see that there's something at the end of the rainbow, and they're really working towards something. The problem is all those people are all lumped together. All those people with all those different kinds of motives are all interlinking together. And what happens is that diminishes the signal of a particular PhD. It really, really does diminish the signal, and there's a lot more noise in the marketplace compared to what the signal is in what the value of a PhD is, because people are really differently motivated, right? That there's so substantial differently motivations that are going on behind the scenes, which makes it difficult for people to understand what exactly the value is of doing a PhD in a particular area, right? Because when they go to actually talk to somebody, they might appear really strange because they have different motives or something like that, right? So it might only be 1 out of 10 that are really directed to do something, and you're going to stumble across 9 people that are doing a PhD for whatever reason else before you find that one person that actually is really motivated to do something. And that is a sort of a problem, and there's not a lot to get around that, because research is really a creative endeavor. And you just have to sort of acknowledge that that's going to happen, and you just have to be sort of part of what's going on. So how do you improve your prospects as a PhD looking for a job, right? Or maybe you are a person looking to hire a PhD, right? There's all sorts of reasons. Well, from the PhD candidate side, maybe you should sort of continue to be of service to others. Try to figure out how you can be of service as much as you possibly can to the marketplace, whoever that marketplace is, and try to devote as much time as you possibly can to that particular marketplace. Now, this sort of relates to my third thing that I'm going to talk about. But first of all, I wanted to talk about, be focused on sort of the second thing is to be really, really focused on sort of critical moments that could sort of change your life. So one of the things, and you might have watched some previous videos that talk about is that academia and research and stuff like that. It's a really small world phenomenon, which means it's very tippy, right? I'm not sure if you heard of that term before, but basically it means that at certain moments, things can change very, very rapidly, and all of a sudden you can get a job, right? So you have to be sort of aware of those particular moments where you can get a job and sort of take advantage of those. So being present at these critical moments, whatever they are, maybe it's a conference, for example, or maybe it is talking to the right people and being connected to the right people, sending out emails to the odd person just in case you don't know, right? Just being very well aware of these sort of critical moments and being present as much as you possibly can at those critical moments. So the third thing that I was alluding to earlier is just make sure you're constantly doing good research. One way that you can demonstrate that you're an amazing PhD is just do extremely good research. And then you can demonstrate that by showing other people. Extremely good research doesn't necessarily mean being really complicated and, not really being able to understand what's going on and stuff, but being very simple and having sort of research that you can communicate to a very, very broad audience, as well as being, complicated in behind the scenes, right? And then people, if you can get sort of the broader audience to read what you're doing and get interested in what you're doing, they don't have to know all the sort of ins and outs of what's going on, but just working on the particular messaging of what you're doing really does make a big difference in terms of getting the word out there that you're actually a really critical and important member of society, and you should be able to get a job pretty quickly and easily if you are doing that particular, doing that kind of stuff. So with those particular points, and coming back to the supply and demand of a PhD, now you probably know why I'm not necessarily a big fan of suggesting supply and demand of a PhD. It's a lot more complicated. The marketplace is much more akin to doing sort of basic research, and companies actually doing basic research and making investments into basic research, compared to more of a commodity type marketplace where you have tremendous amount of supply and tremendous amount of demand of one single individual, really well defined particular widget or particular thing that you're commodity that you're looking at. So with that, again, make sure that you're being a service to others as much as you possibly can, preferably at scale, however that is, being sort of present at critical moments, and as well as just focusing on doing good research over time. That's going to hopefully get you a job in the long run. Now, there's short run fluctuations with that, obviously. So 1 year it might be difficult to not be able to get a job, but over the course of a couple of years, and I know that's difficult to sort of to sort of deal with, but I do have a video on sort of managing your financial resources, a couple of them actually, and I probably plan to do a couple of more on managing your financial resources in a PhD or research degree, because it's a really tricky thing to do. And that you should be always thinking about having slack resources and saving as much as you possibly can, just in case those emergency sort of problems that do pop up, particularly the job market sort of is not the right job market when you graduate and you can't find a job. So that's it. If you like this video, make sure you do a thumbs up. I do put out videos every Friday about helping out graduate students, as well as I put out stuff that's interesting for innovation and all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to put out a video every day now, so you can keep watching and let me know what you think. So take care, have a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next video. Bye.